Tokyo, early morning, spring, 1945. A light mist floats above the rooftops of a scarred city. The sound of distant air raid sirens still lingers in the memories of those who survived the last attack. On the ground, crews of the Imperial Japanese Army Air Service scramble to ready their last remaining interceptors, the once proud Nakajima Ki-84 Hayate and the aging Mitsubishi A6M Zeros. The pilots have grown used to facing lumbering B-29 superfortresses, but what they're about to encounter will change their perception of air combat forever. This is the story of the day Japanese pilots were truly shocked, the day America's P-51 Mustangs appeared over Tokyo. Let's rewind just a few months. By late 1944, Japan's air defense situation was desperate. The empire's earlier dominance in the air, from the Philippines to the skies over China, had crumbled. The once feared Zero fighters were now outclassed by newer Allied designs. Fuel shortages grounded many squadrons, and worst of all, the B-29 superfortress thundered across the Pacific, striking the home islands with a level of power Japan had never imagined possible. At first, the Japanese believed that their home defense network could withstand the raids. Anti-aircraft guns dotted Tokyo Bay, radar stations were hastily constructed, and brave young pilots continued to climb into poorly maintained aircraft to face the incoming waves of silver bombers. Yet something always puzzled them. The B-29s came from so far away. American bases in Saipan, Tinian, and Guam were over 1,500 miles from Japan. How could these bombers fly all that distance, drop their deadly loads, and escape without fighter escort? For a time, that gave the Japanese a small measure of hope. The B-29s, though deadly, often flew high and alone, without the sharp sting of enemy fighters at their side. Japanese interceptors, even with their declining capabilities, could at least attempt daring attacks from above or below. But everything changed in early 1945. In February, a new rumor spread across Japanese airfields, whispers of a new American fighter sighted over Iwo Jima and Chichijima. Pilots described it as long, sleek, impossibly fast. Some said it looked like a silver falcon with infinite fuel. To those who heard the name P-51 Mustang for the first time, it was just another foreign code number. But soon, that name would become synonymous with horror. Across the Pacific at Iwo Jima, American engineers were working relentlessly to turn the black volcanic island into an airbase. It wasn't just a staging area for bombers. It was the key to solving one of the greatest challenges of air warfare, long-range fighter escort. For months, P-51Ds of the 15th and 21st Fighter Groups had been training for a new mission, accompanying B-29s all the way to Tokyo. The first long-range escort mission launched in early March 1945. Over 200 P-51 Mustangs roared into the sky from Iwo Jima, forming up with streams of B-29 bombers heading north. The flight path would take them across open ocean for hours, a journey few fighter pilots in history had ever attempted. But as the green coastlines of Japan came into view, the Mustang pilots knew they were about to make history. Meanwhile in Tokyo, Lieutenant Kenji Takahashi of the 47th Sentai was suiting up for yet another desperate intercept. He had flown since the early days of the war, from Burma to the Marianas, but now his homeland was under direct assault. His trusty Ki-84 Frank was one of the few aircraft in the hangar that still had enough fuel for takeoff. As he pulled his flight goggles down and glanced at the smoky skyline, he thought of his family evacuated to the countryside. He whispered a short prayer, then gave a nod to his ground crew. Moments later, the air raid sirens began. High above, the sky darkened, not from clouds, but from formation after formation of B-29 superfortresses. Kenji and his comrades pushed their throttles forward, climbing hard toward the silver swarm. Over the radio, a voice shouted, "Enemy bombers approaching central Tokyo, altitude 25,000. Engines screamed, and black smoke trailed from the tailpipes as the Japanese fighters clawed for altitude. Then, something new appeared on the horizon. Shiny, needle-nosed aircraft glinting in the sunlight. At first, the pilots assumed they were more bombers, perhaps stragglers from a different formation. But as they closed in, the truth became obvious. These were fighters, and not Japanese. The P-51 Mustangs had arrived. The first encounter was almost surreal. Japanese pilots dove toward what they thought were isolated bombers, only to be intercepted in mid-dive by Mustangs coming out of the sun. Their approach was silent until the last second, and when the tracers began to streak past, the Japanese realized they were facing an entirely new kind of enemy. The Mustangs were fast, astonishingly fast, and seemingly tireless. They could climb steeply, roll instantly, and even chase the interceptors all the way back down beneath the clouds. Kenji found himself locked in a vicious dogfight. His P-84 was one of Japan's better fighters, powerful and still dangerous. But the Mustang that latched onto his tail moved with a grace that defied belief. He pulled sharply left, cut power, kicked his rudder, and dove, the airframe groaning in protest. The Mustang stayed behind him effortlessly. For the first time, Kenji felt a cold spike of fear in his chest. Below him, Tokyo burned. American pilots in the formation radioed to each other. "Watch that Zero diving low! I've got him! Mustang 2-1, cover me!" To them, it was another day's work. To the Japanese, it was the beginning of the end of air superiority over their capital. For decades, the Japanese Air Force had prided itself on its pilot skill and agility in dogfighting. But now, even the most experienced aces found themselves stunned by the P-51's combination of speed, range, and stability. After surviving the first engagement, a few pilots returned to base and reported what they had seen. One described it simply: "They come from the sea, fight above Tokyo, and never run out of fuel." In the weeks that followed, the sky over Japan changed forever. The American long-range fighters began to appear more often, escorting B-29s, strafing airfields, and even attacking trains and factories across Honshu. It wasn't just bombing anymore, it was domination of the air. Japanese pilots started calling the Mustangs invincible eagles. One veteran later said, "We thought they were machines sent by the gods. They were everywhere." But where did these legendary fighters come from? And how did a design once dismissed as an experimental aircraft become the most feared machine over the Pacific? To answer that, we need to go back to the drawing boards of 1940, where a small British order set off a chain of events that would lead to the P-51 Mustang's birth. As the war in Europe intensified, the Royal Air Force sought to expand its fighter production. The North American Aviation Company, based in California, offered to create a brand new fighter design in less than 120 days. The result was the NA-73X prototype, the first Mustang. Its performance was impressive, but at that stage, nobody imagined it would become a legend. It wasn't until the British fitted it with the Rolls-Royce Merlin engine that it transformed into a masterpiece. Suddenly, the Mustang could climb higher, fly faster, and fight longer than almost anything in the air. When America entered the war, the U.S. Army Air Forces immediately recognized its potential. After further refinement, the P-51D variant emerged, featuring a bubble canopy, 6.50 caliber machine guns, and most importantly, internal fuel capacity along with drop tanks that gave it a range of over 1,600 miles. That range was exactly what commanders in the Pacific needed. Until then, no Allied fighter could escort bombers all the way from the Mariana Islands to Tokyo until the Mustang arrived, staged from Iwo Jima. And so, by 1945, the most advanced American fighter of the war was finally unleashed over Japan. For Kenji Takahashi and the surviving Japanese pilots, every mission became a nightmare. They would take off with only enough high-octane fuel for 1 or 2 combat engagements. Many aircraft couldn't even reach the altitude of the bombers. Meanwhile, the Mustangs seemed to materialize from thin air, always positioned perfectly above or behind. After each sortie, the stories grew darker, tales of pilots shot down before they even turned to face their attackers, of formations shredded within minutes. One commander told his unit, "We can die heroically, but we can no longer win." The Mustang's shock value wasn't just in its performance. It was psychological. For the first time, Japanese defenders realized they were fighting an enemy who could dictate every engagement. The Americans now owned not only the sea and the land, but also the very sky above their emperor's city. And on the ground, the bombs fell heavier, the fires burned longer, and the sound of the Mustang's Merlin engine became the echo of Japan's looming defeat. But the story of these missions, the daring flights from Iwo Jima to Tokyo, the faces of the pilots who made them, and the few Japanese aces who still tried to stand against them, That's where the real human drama unfolds. Because behind every Mustang cockpit, there sat a man pushing the limits of courage and endurance. And on the other side, in the shattered hangars around Tokyo, stood Japanese pilots who refused to give up, no matter how hopeless it seemed. March 4th, 1945. Dawn rises over Iwo Jima. The smell of volcanic ash and fuel hangs thick in the humid air. Mechanics hurry from plane to plane, checking oil lines, adjusting gun sights, tightening the bolts that hold drop tanks in place. Between the roaring engines, pilots move quietly, their faces hidden behind goggles and oxygen masks. They know today's mission will be different. For the first time, they will fly all the way to Tokyo. Captain Richard "Red" Morrison, a 24-year-old from Indiana, leans against the wing of his bare metal P-51D Mustang, its nose art painted with a single white star and the words "Miss Ellie." He looks across the flight line, row after row of Mustangs shimmering in the morning haze. Each is armed, fueled, and fitted with two 110-gallon drop tanks under the wings. The pilots don't say much. They all understand what's coming. As the sun breaks the horizon, the order comes: start engines. Hundreds of Mustangs roar to life, their Merlin engines snarling over the black sands of Iwo Jima. The smell of burning aviation fuel fills the air. One after another, the Mustangs line up on the rough coral runway. The first plane accelerates, tail lifting, wheels barely clearing the edge of the island before vanishing into the blue Pacific. Over the radio, the voice of the squadron leader crackles through the static. All flights form up on heading 320. Climb to 5,000, maintain visual with bombers. Behind them, the B-29s rise from their longer runways, silver giants climbing slowly into the sky. To the pilots below, they look like immense metal fortresses gliding toward destiny. 5 hours later, the vast Pacific beneath them gives way to a thin gray smudge on the horizon, the coast of Japan. From his cockpit, Captain Morrison squints. "That's it, boys," he radios. "Tokyo, dead ahead." As the formation climbs, the excitement turns to tension. Between the oxygen masks and the rumble of engines, the men fall into silence. Thousands of feet below, air raid sirens begin to wail across the Japanese capital. In air bases outside the city, pilots still half asleep scramble toward their aircraft. Mechanics shout, "B-29s approaching, multiple formations." At Chofu Airfield, Lieutenant Kenji Takahashi runs toward his Ki-84 Hayate, pulling on his gloves as ground crews frantically drag fuel hoses. "How many?" he asks between heavy breaths. His commander shouts back, "Too many, maybe 300 bombers." Kenji nods once. "Then let's go." Machines sputter, propellers spin, and the fighters claw into the air. One by one, they rise through the haze, the last defenders of a dying empire. But today, the bombers aren't alone. As the Japanese interceptors reach altitude, the glint of sunlight catches something in the distance. Dozens of smaller shapes weaving gracefully through the bomber formations. Fast, shiny, agile. Kenji's wingman murmurs through the radio, "Those aren't bombers. What are they?" No one answers for a moment. Then someone shouts, "Foreign fighters! Fighters!" By now, the sky is alive with motion. B-29s thunder on in steady columns, while the smaller figures, Mustangs, peel off and dive with lethal precision. Captain Morrison spots the lead Japanese element climbing from the north. "Blue group, break right, engage bandits at 11 o'clock. Two squadrons of P-51s roll into a steep turn, diving like hawks. The sun glints off their canopies as they streak toward the attackers. Tracer fire fills the air. Kenji sees them coming, yanks his control column, and dives. The first Mustang flashes past him, the silver blur so fast he almost can't comprehend it. In his peripheral vision, he catches the white and blue roundel, and a cold realization hits. "Americans," he whispers. He pulls into a tight loop and fires, seeing the tracer rounds streak toward the oncoming fighter, but the Mustang rolls, inverts, and slips out of view. A heartbeat later, bullets slam into Kenji's tail. His plane shudders violently. The canopy glass spiderwebs. "Break! Break!" he hears over the radio, but there's no time. This isn't the slow ballet of dogfights he's trained for, it's chaos. Mustangs appear and vanish almost instantly. Their speed and energy are overwhelming. For every Japanese fighter that dives toward the bombers, two Mustangs intercept, slicing through the formation like knives through paper. On the ground, Tokyo citizens look up. The clear blue sky is filled with white contrails twisting like snakes. To them, it looks like the very heavens are unraveling. Captain Morrison locks onto a Ki-84, climbing hard on his left. "Got one," he mutters. He squeezes the trigger. 6 Browning machine guns roar in unison. The tracer lines arc upward, rip through the enemy's wing, and ignite the fuel. A fireball blooms. "Splash one," he calls out. His wingman, Lieutenant Cameron, glances over his shoulder. "Hell of a sight, Red. They're fast, I'll give 'em that." "Keep your eyes open," Morrison says. "There's plenty more where that came from." By the time the bombers release their payloads, Tokyo is already engulfed in smoke. Below, entire districts vanish under the rolling firestorms. The Mustangs dive down to strafe trains, warehouses, and power plants, their Merlin engines shrieking through the dense air. Far below, Kenji limps back to base, his aircraft riddled with holes. His instruments flicker, and his left wing is scorched black. Over the radio, voices fade in and out. "Return to base, too many, retreat." He clenches his jaw. His homeland burns beneath him. He cannot look down. When he lands, the airfield is half destroyed. Mechanics pull his canopy open, drag him out of the smoking cockpit. He sits on the ground, listening to the distant rumble of the bombers and the whining roar of American fighters still circling overhead. For the rest of the day, the radio fills with confusion. Reports pour in from across Honshu. P-51s sighted over Nagoya, Yokohama, even as far north as Sendai. Each report ends the same way. They strike fast, vanish, and never seem to run low on fuel. That night, Kenji sits under the broken wings of his aircraft. A mechanic sets down a bowl of rice next to him. "Do you think they'll come again?" he asks quietly. Kenji stares into the darkness, the sound of fire still crackling in the distance. "Yes," he says, "and soon." He was right. The next morning, the Mustangs came again, lower, bolder, more aggressive than ever before. For the American pilots, the success of the mission was exhilarating yet haunting. They knew the destruction below. They saw what their bombs and bullets had done. But orders were orders. The war had already taken too much to turn back now. In his tent that night, Captain Morrison wrote a letter home. He didn't mention the details. Military censors would strike them anyway. But he wrote one line that would stay with him for the rest of his life. "We flew to Tokyo today. It was like flying into the future and leaving the past behind us burning." As the raids intensified, the Japanese high command met in secrecy. Reports of P-51 actions arrived daily. Dozens of encounters, hundreds of losses. The commanders searched for solutions, but there were none. The country's aviation fuel reserves were almost gone. Aircraft production was crippled by industrial bombings. The younger pilots were barely trained. The once proud spirit of the Imperial Air Force was being consumed in the fires of Tokyo. Still, some chose to fight, not because they believed they could win, but because they couldn't stop fighting. Among them was a 22-year-old pilot named Hiroshi Oda from Nagoya. He had flown the Zero since his training days, though he knew it was outdated. On April 7th, he volunteered for what would be one of the last major defensive sorties over Tokyo. His diary entry from that morning read simply, "They say the new American planes can cross oceans. I will see them today." At 1100 hours, he took off with 7 aircraft from Yokota Air Base. Less than 20 minutes later, they met a formation of Mustangs escorting another wave of bombers. For the next half hour, the sky above Tokyo became pure chaos. Silver Mustangs slicing through formations, white vapor trails curling across the blue sky, and the muffled thunder of bombs echoing from below. One Mustang pilot, Lieutenant David Jensen, later recalled in an interview, "We saw them climbing, maybe 8 or 10 of them. They came head-on and then split into 2 elements. I picked one going right and followed him into a dive. He pulled hard, but I stayed glued to him. My guns chattered, and pieces came off his tail. It was over in seconds, but it felt like forever." For the pilots who survived those encounters, Japanese or American, those seconds became lifelong memories. For some, flashes of blinding sunlight, burning engines, and the echo of Merlin engines haunted their dreams for years. As April turned to May, the situation was clear. Tokyo's air defenses had collapsed. The P-51s ruled the sky, and yet, amid the ruin, strange moments of mutual respect began to form. Fleeting, unspoken recognition between men who'd fought each other to exhaustion. Kenji Takahashi remembered one such moment. While trailing smoke over the Chiba coastline, he He looked out of his shattered cockpit window and saw a silver Mustang flying parallel to him, close enough that he could see the pilot's eyes behind the goggles. The American didn't fire. He just raised his hand, saluted, and peeled away into the clouds. For a second, Kenji forgot the war. He would never forget that gesture. Early May, 1945. The cherry blossoms around Tokyo have long since turned to ash. Night after night, the firebombs have scorched the city. Whole neighborhoods are gone, replaced by blackened ruins that stretch as far as the horizon. For the people of Japan, air raid sirens are now part of daily life. Children know the sound before they know the shape of an airplane. At Tachikawa Airfield, the remaining pilots of the 47th Sentai gather in a makeshift bunker. The walls are damp, the ceiling cracked, the air tastes of oil and smoke. There are only 8 flyable aircraft left, 3 Ki-84 Hayate, 2 Ki-61 Tony, and a pair of ancient Zeros salvaged from storage. Their mission each day is the same: intercept whatever bombers or fighters appear, regardless of odds. Lieutenant Kenji Takahashi sits quietly, tightening his flight gloves. His once white uniform is now permanently stained with oil and sweat. Around him, young recruits, boys barely 19, whisper in nervous tones. The oldest veterans stare at the floor. No one speaks of victory anymore. The base commander steps inside, his face pale and expressionless. "We have reports of another large formation heading east from Iwo Jima," he says flatly. "More B-29s, escorted by fighters, possibly the same type as before." A ripple moves through the room. Everyone knows what that means. More Mustangs. Kenji stands up. "How many?" "Too many to count," the commander answers. "Tokyo will be their target again." The pilots exchange glances. Someone mutters, "Then this is where we make our stand." Minutes later, engines roar once more. The surviving fighters claw into the pale morning sky, wings shimmering against the rising sun. Below them, columns of black smoke still drift over the capital. As the Japanese climb, the radio operators on the coast intercept frantic chatter. Hundreds of enemy fighters approaching. Altitude 20,000, they report. From the horizon, the powerful hum of Merlin engines builds like an approaching storm. Captain Richard "Red" Morrison leads his flight northward, eyes fixed on the distant smudge that marks Tokyo Bay. His wingman calls out, "Red Leader, I've got multiple bogeys at 2 o'clock low." Morrison grins behind his oxygen mask. "Let's go greet them." The two formations converge. From above, the Mustangs dive in unison, sunlight flashing off polished aluminum, while the Japanese fighters turn to meet them head-on. For a moment, both sides see each other clearly. Faces through glass canopies, hands tightening on triggers, hearts pounding. Then the sky erupts. Tracer fire arcs through the air like fiery comets. Planes twist and roll in impossible maneuvers, leaving spiral trails of vapor across the brilliant blue canvas. Morrison pulls up hard, feeling the G-forces crush his chest. Behind him, a Japanese Ki-61 tries to follow, but the Mustang's climb rate is too great. Morrison rolls inverted, dives, and lets loose a burst. The enemy fighter explodes in a flash of orange flame. Down below, Kenji locks onto a silver Mustang banking too hard out of a turn. He fires a short burst, hits. The Mustang rolls left, smoke pouring from its engine. Kenji follows, ready for the kill, but the American pilot performs an impossible maneuver, cutting throttle and sliding behind him in a perfect rolling scissors. Kenji's heart stops. He yanks back, but tracer fire rips across his fuselage. His canopy spiderwebs again. He dives, praying the engine holds. The fight becomes an endless dance in the clouds. Up, roll, dive, shoot, climb. Each second feels like an hour. The sky is filled with burning wrecks tumbling to earth. For the Mustangs, fuel is always the clock. Morrison radios, "Blue Flight, check fuel, we've got 20 minutes for RTB." The replies come back, low, lower, critical, but they stay. The battle isn't over yet. Kenji sees a pair of Mustangs diving on his formation. "Brake left," he shouts. His wingman, barely out of training, panics and jerks upward instead. A stream of .50 caliber fire tears through his plane, detonating the fuel tank. For a heartbeat, Kenji sees his friend's aircraft become a falling sun, then nothing but smoke. He doesn't scream. He can't. His voice is gone. For the next 10 minutes, surviving Japanese pilots fight not for victory but to stay alive. By the time the sirens stop, only a handful make it back to base. Their faces are hollow. Their uniforms smell of smoke. No one speaks. In the days that follow, the reports grow worse. Airfields are attacked directly. Mustangs sweep across Honshu, hitting anything that moves. Rail lines, vehicles, even fishing boats trying to slip fuel south. Japan's lifelines are being severed one by one. To counter the devastation, desperate measures are proposed. One idea suggests converting training aircraft into kamikaze interceptors, small planes packed with explosives, launched at bomber formations. It is madness, yet in those final months, madness seems logical. Kenji refuses to volunteer for suicide missions. He still believes he can fight with honor and come home alive. His commander says nothing. Deep down, both men know the war is already lost. June arrives, bringing humid winds and heavier bombings. More squadrons of P-51s arrive from distant Pacific islands. Their red and yellow tails flash in the sun, each painted with the symbols of the 15th, 21st, or 506th Fighter Groups. To the people of Tokyo, those bright markings become a terrifying omen. One afternoon, a squadron of Mustangs descends to just a few hundred feet, strafing trains northwest of the capital. A farmer working in the fields drops his tools and watches as the silvery shapes roar past, sunlight flashing off their wings. They move faster than any bird, trailing screams that echo in the hills long after they're gone. High above, Captain Morrison leads another mission, this time to escort photo recon B-29s mapping the damage. From his altitude, he can see the land stretching endlessly below. Mountains, rivers, and the black scars of destruction reaching all the way to the sea. He doesn't speak. None of them do. Through his radio headset, static crackles, followed by the voice of ground control. Red Leader, be advised. Enemy fighters departing from Atsugi. Morrison sighs. Copy that. Let's go to work. Minutes later, the horizon fills with rising smoke trails, another hopeless sortie from Japan's exhausted air force. The Mustangs descend to meet them head-on, sunlight bursting between their propeller arcs. Kenji is among them again. His Hayate is patched together with scavenged parts, engine coughing before takeoff. Yet once in the air, it feels like life again. Speed, sound, wind, purpose. For a fleeting moment, he forgets the ruin below. He climbs toward the enemy formation. Through the glare, he spots a single Mustang breaking away. He chooses him, closes distance, and fires. The tracers connect, hits. The silver aircraft wobbles. Kenji closes in, lines up for another burst, and freezes. The damaged Mustang's pilot isn't bailing out. He isn't turning. He's still flying, straight toward Kenji. Both men pull hard on their sticks, their wings nearly clip. Kenji glimpses the other's face for an instant, young, determined, maybe scared. The Mustang rolls away, trailing smoke, disappearing into clouds. Kenji levels off, gasping for air. He doesn't know if the enemy survived, but something inside him shifts. For the first time in months, he feels the weight of what he's doing, what both sides are doing. That night, he writes his first letter home in weeks. My dearest Aya, he begins. Today I met another pilot high above our homeland. We fought not as enemies, but as men caught in the same storm. I do not hate him, even though I must fight him. Perhaps when this is over, there will be no storms left. But soon, even his letters stop. Supply lines collapse, and communication with airfields in the countryside becomes impossible. By July 1945, the P-51 Mustangs have complete control of Japan's skies. Their bases on Iwo Jima and Okinawa send daily waves of sorties hundreds of miles north. Pilots like Morrison are exhausted, flying their 50th, 60th, sometimes 70th mission. Yet they keep going, knowing victory is close. For the Japanese, the meaning of home air defense has become tragic irony. Ground crews hide planes under trees, masking them with nets and straw. Some fighters take off only once before vanishing forever. Still, Kenji climbs into his battered Hayate one last time. July 25th, the morning sky is strangely clear. No clouds, no smoke, only silence. Then faintly, the familiar hum begins again. The American engines, distant but growing louder. He looks to his mechanic. Tell my family I fought well, he says, climbing into the cockpit. The mechanic bows without a word. Moments later, Kenji's plane disappears into the blue, chasing a sound that will define the rest of his life. August 1945. Summer heat suffocates Tokyo. The air carries the bitter scent of burned wood and engine fuel. Streets are narrow trenches between ruins, where silence feels heavier than sound. For days, no one has seen an enemy aircraft. They seem to come and go like ghosts on the wind. But every now and then, far in the distance, someone hears the deep, steady hum of a Merlin engine and looks toward the sky. The P-51 Mustangs still patrol Japan's shattered skies, their missions changing from combat to reconnaissance, escort, and mercy flights for downed airmen. For the pilots who survived the great Tokyo raids, the end feels near, but not yet real. Captain Richard Red Morrison leans against the landing strut of his Mustang, Miss Ellie, the same aircraft he flew that first morning from Iwo Jima. Its silver finish is pocked with bullet holes and streaked from oil leaks. He stares toward the horizon, a haze of blue and gray where the sea meets the sky. He's flown 70 combat missions now, seen friends shot down, watched cities disappear. Even the victories feel hollow. He opens his flight logbook, runs a thumb over the dates: March, April, May, June. Each entry is shorter than the last, fewer words but heavier ones. Beside him, Lieutenant David Jensen sits quietly, cleaning his pistol. "They'll surrender soon," Jensen says. "They have to. There's nothing left to bomb." Morrison looks up, his eyes tired. "Maybe, but until someone tells us it's over, we keep flying." Across the Pacific, the same hopeless rhythm continues in Japan's remaining air bases. At one small airstrip outside Matsumoto, 4 planes are all that remain of an entire Sentai. Among them is Lieutenant Kenji Takahashi's Ki-84 Hayate, now little more than a relic patched with sheet metal and scraps of canvas. The mechanics have no more replacement parts. They run engines on low-octane fuel meant for trucks. Even so, Kenji climbs into the cockpit each morning, checks his gauges, and waits for orders that never come. Sometimes he flies short patrols over farmland, just to remind himself what flight feels like, to remember a time when the sky belonged to men, not machines. One evening, his squadron leader calls a meeting. The man's voice trembles slightly as he reads from a radio communique intercepted by headquarters. The Americans have dropped a new type of bomb on Hiroshima, entire city destroyed. A stunned silence falls over the room. No one speaks because no one truly understands. Minutes later, someone quietly asks, "If that is true, why do we still fight?" No one answers. Over the next days, the remnants of Japan's air defense dissolve completely. No aircraft scramble. No radar alarms cry out. Even the roar of enemy engines goes unnoticed. Tokyo is already in ruins, and the people have no strength left to run for cover. August 14, 1945. Kenji wakes before dawn. The airfield is eerily quiet. Mechanics sit idly beside crates of unused ammunition, murmuring rumors about an impending surrender. But command insists silence. "No word yet," they say. "Stay ready." By mid-morning, the faint hum returns, the sound of approaching P-51s. Dozens of them, glinting silver and gold in the rising sun. Kenji grabs his helmet. "I'll go," he tells his crew, though no one has ordered him to. He climbs into the cockpit and starts the engine. It coughs, sputters, then roars to life one final time. From the south, Morrison's squadron approaches in tight formation, scanning below for any sign of resistance. "Keep altitude. No targets unless fired upon," he radios. They aren't here to destroy, just to watch, to ensure the bombers can pass unopposed. Still, the tension grips every man in the air. And then, impossibly, one Japanese fighter rises from the haze. Alone. "Contact. Single bandit at 2 o'clock low," calls Jensen. Morrison squints. "Hold fire, boys. Just one?" Kenji's plane climbs slowly, struggling for speed. He doesn't lock weapons. He doesn't intend to. As he levels beside the American formation, perhaps 200 meters away, he can see them clearly. Gleaming aircraft with blue insignias, their pilots visible through curved canopies. For several seconds, the two sides simply look at each other. Jensen mutters through the radio, "He's not attacking, Red. What's he doing?" Morrison exhales deeply. "Let him be." Kenji raises his right hand from the control column. Through his cracked canopy, he gives a single, deliberate salute. And in that moment, history pauses. Morrison raises his own gloved hand and returns the gesture. No words pass between them. No bullets. No hatred. Just two men separated by war and altitude, acknowledging something far beyond allegiance, the shared exhaustion of those who survived when too many didn't. Kenji banks gently to the left, descends, and disappears into thin cloud. The Mustangs hold their course north. Hours later, the radio message comes in. Emperor Hirohito has announced Japan's surrender. The war is over. Days blur into weeks. The occupation begins. American aircraft land on Japanese runways that days earlier had been bombed into gravel. Mechanics from both sides stand shoulder to shoulder, inspecting wrecks, trading quiet looks of disbelief. The proud white rising sun insignia now sits faded and chipped on scorched fuselages beside the bright blue stars of America. Kenji, still alive, stands at Matsumoto Airfield as American troops arrive. He watches a P-51 taxi down the same dirt path where his friends once launched into battle. As it stops near him, the cockpit opens. A young American pilot hops down, sweating under the August heat. For a long moment, the two men just stare, one in a tattered flight suit, the other in a freshly laundered uniform. The American smiles faintly and offers his hand. After a pause, Kenji takes it. Neither speaks the other's language, but both understand perfectly. Months later, peace returns slowly, like an injured bird learning to fly again. Streets bustle once more, though ruins remain. Children chase one another through the wreckage of old hangars, playing with bent propellers and empty shell casings as if they were toys. Above them, now and then, a single silver P-51 circles lazily in the distance, not as a weapon, but as a symbol of what once ruled the skies. For the Japanese people, that humming sound once brought fear. Now it's simply a reminder of how far their country has fallen, and how, despite devastation, life somehow continues. For Morrison, peace never feels simple. In September, he returns to the United States. His family greets him with celebration, flags, and parades. But when he closes his eyes at night, he still sees firestorms over Tokyo and the face of a young pilot who didn't shoot. In later interviews, he tells a story few believe. There was one Japanese pilot who saluted me. He could have attacked, but he didn't. That moment reminded me what being human means, even at 20,000 feet above hell. When asked if he ever learned who that man was, Morrison shakes his head. No. And maybe that's how it's meant to be. Years pass. Kenji survives the famine and rebuilding years, living quietly as a mechanic in rural Nagano. He never flies again, though he keeps a framed photo of his Ki-84 on the wall, beside a small wooden carving of a bird in flight. Sometimes in spring, he sits outside and listens to the distant rumble of civilian aircraft overhead. Each time, his eyes lift skyward and he whispers, "Merlin, I still hear you." He never speaks of his salute, and he never learns what became of the man who returned it. But historians remember. They write of the strange symmetry of war, how technology, courage, and tragedy meet in the air, how men who fought to destroy one another could still find respect in a single silent gesture. Decades later, at an air show in California, a restored P-51D Mustang takes to the sky. Its polished metal reflects the sun the same way it did all those years ago over Tokyo. The crowd watches in awe as the Merlin engine roars, deep, smooth, beautiful. Among the spectators is an elderly Japanese man visiting his American grandson. When the announcer says, "This aircraft escorted B-29 bombers over Japan in 1945, the man's gaze lingers on the sky a long time. He doesn't tell anyone his name. He just stands, his hat pressed over his heart, as the Silver Falcon climbs into the blue, higher, faster, until it becomes a shining speck that vanishes into heaven. And somewhere, perhaps in memory more than in truth, he imagines another aircraft beside it, rising from the ashes. Not enemies anymore, just pilots, both reaching for the sky.